Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. It is officially spring, even though we're pretty much all locked in our houses, and I hope that you guys have been staying indoors and not going outside unless you absolutely have to, unlike some of these dumbass spring breakers who have been frolicking on the beach in Florida and not giving a shit. So don't be them. So today's video is a VBX, Familia Speaks video. For those of you that are kind of new around here, VBX means Viva Bella Extina, and these are basically you guys' video requests. So I do take requests, and if you'd like to submit one, my email address is in the description box below. So today's request is basically two parts. So the first question, and shout out to the person that requested this, is first, does people of color or POC solidarity, more specifically, a Black and brown unity exist? If it does or does not, how so? Okay, and then the second question is, does interracial marriage and miscegenation get rid of racism? Okay, so I'm going to, again, do the video in two parts, and I'll begin with addressing question number one. So some of you may remember a little while back, Barani Moon did a video highlighting a few Black and brown coalitions that existed a few decades ago. So I'm going to quickly highlight some of those and then give my personal opinion as to whether I believe that Black and brown unity exists. Okay, so based on what I found online, I'm just going to read to you guys. The first wave of movements asserting the objective of forming unity or coalitions between people of color began in the late 1960s in the US and declined by the 70s. Chicano activists such as Cesar Chavez in 1965 to 66 and Reyes Lopez Tijerina in 1967 to 69 collaborated with civil rights and the Black Power organizations to forge Black and brown collaborative activist work, okay? So organizations such as the Poor People's Campaign, which was organized by Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968, and Fred Hampton's Rainbow Coalition in 1969 attempted to construct multiracial coalitions based on the common interest of dismantling the structures which created poverty, okay? However, these eventually fell off due to government agencies, sabotage campaigns, and local police departments who began to target these local activists. And of course, then you had the assassination of leaders such as, Dr. King and stuff. And so this wave of multiracial coalitions declined by the 1970s. So I found this website that focused a little bit on like the Black and brown unity that Martin Luther King tried to create. And this website said that one of the common misconceptions about Dr. King is that he only cared about causes that affected Black people. In fact, he stood by what he is quoted saying, quote unquote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." Dr. King reached out to Latino leaders in 1968, hoping to unite low-income communities across the U.S. as he planned the Poor People's March. Dr. King took an intersectional approach to fighting for justice and helped mobilize Latinos of all racial backgrounds. In 1963, Dr. King pushed for a strong Latino presence at the march in Washington, asking Gilberto Valentin, president of the Puerto Rican Day Parade, to bring his supporters and deliver remarks in Spanish at the rally. So that was something that I definitely did not know. So as you all can see, historically, there were certain leaders, community leaders, both on the Black and the Latino side that tried to come together to fight collectively for the interests and for the, I would say, some of the struggles that both Blacks and Latinos have faced in this country. Because at the end of the day, in many fractions of society, I feel like Blacks and Latinos have coexisted and face a lot of the same struggles. They have both faced oppression in many cases. So, you know how they say strength in numbers, and I think coming together to fight some of these common battles, I think that's effective. But unfortunately, they were kind of dismantled pretty soon. So now, whether I personally believe, at least in the present day, as to whether Black and brown unity exists, I feel that On a smaller scale or on like an individual level, or depending on where in the US you are, I do think that Black and brown unity can and most certainly exist. I think, like, especially here on the East Coast, it is not uncommon to see Blacks and Latinos living amongst each other, forming friendships, relationships, getting married, having kids, etc., etc. That's not uncommon at all. But then you have other areas of the US in which, even though Latinos and Blacks may live near each other, they're still very segregated. Okay, there are still Latinos that don't really mess with Black people, and I'm sure there are some Black people that feel the opposite. Okay, you have people like Tariq Nasheed, for example, that says that there is no Black and brown coalition. Okay, then there's, countless Latino YouTubers that agree, okay, that no, there is no Black and brown coalition. We do not get along. We are too culturally different, etc. But then you have people on the opposite end of the spectrum who advocates for Black and brown unity. Radical Latino is one. Shout out to you if you're watching this. Some of you know who he is. He promotes Black and brown unity a lot. And, I'm sure there's some Black people that do. So I feel like you have, again, Blacks and Latinos that are on both ends. They're either for or against it, because I have seen some, I don't want to say anti-Hispanic, but I have seen some Black people within some of these recent, like, the ADOS or FBA movements that are like, nah, I'm really looking out for my own people. I'm not worrying about Latinos, etc., etc. Okay. So, y'all have heard me talk about my personal experiences over and over again. I've always had Black people as friends. I never had an issue. Now, I also want to add that I do think that the country of origin of the Latino plays a role as well, okay? In my opinion, I do think that certain Latinos are more open to this idea of Black and brown unity, or they're more open to forming friendships with Black people. For example, people always use Puerto Ricans as an example, or I guess New Yorkers, and how they are pretty tight-knit with Black people, I guess, which to me, it makes sense considering how many generations a lot of Puerto Ricans have been in the U.S., specifically in New York, and many of them grew up alongside Black people, so it's not surprising to me, I guess. A lot of them are quite close with Black people. I will say that in many cases, it's not uncommon to see many Dominicans with, forming friendships or whatever with Black people as well. So I do think the country of origin plays a role, as well as whether or not the Latino themselves is a Black or more mixed Latino, because I do think it is easier for those of us that are a little more on the Blacker side to make friends with Black people. Of course, that's not to say that there aren't white Latinos that can't make friends with Black people, because of course there are. But again, just in my opinion, I do think certain factors contribute to whether the Latino themselves will be more open to this idea of Black and brown unity. Okay, so that's my thoughts on that. Now, going on to question number 2. Does interracial marriage and miscegenation get rid of racism? Okay. So for this, I also looked up a few articles just to give you guys different perspective, I guess. Now, my simplest answer to the question, does race mixing get rid of racism? I think that the most basic answer is no, it does not. Now, does it help with possibly reducing it a bit? Maybe. Okay. And I think to an extent it does. Okay. And I'll get back to that a little bit, but I just wanted to read you guys something that I found online. So it says, racism as an ideology or the set of structures that create racialized inequality change all the time. Now that colonialism no longer exists and the transatlantic slave trade doesn't exist, racism is able to adapt to different kinds of economic and political scenarios, okay? And then they give the example, the Irish and the Italians were once groups seen as distinct from white people, But as they sought to distance themselves from Black people, they were ultimately accepted as white. So this alludes back to how many people say that race is a social construct. Now, personally, I believe that although there is biological realities to race, it is to an extent, probably maybe even more so, a social construct, because people will fit you into a box even though you are racially mixed, So to me, that means it's a social construct. Okay, so the goalposts are always moving in favor of whoever holds the most power at that particular moment in history, which for the most part, at least on this side of the world, has been Anglo-Saxon white people, okay? And as far as the goalposts moving in favor of whoever holds the most power, I think you see that with how Latinos are many times labeled as white, even when we're not racially white, okay? But that is done in order to, increase their own numbers. Now, the unequivocal lesson from Latin America is that even when everyone is mixed, racism doesn't go away. In Latin American societies, mixture has been going on for 500 years. A majority of people in these societies would recognize themselves as mixed, which is true. Nevertheless, we still see very clear racism simply because some people see themselves as and are more European and less Black or indigenous than others. Not everybody is equally mixed. And I think that is a very good point. Now, some of you may remember watching my video about can Black and white Latinos get along? And in that video, I talked about a term that I had found called Latin American exceptionalism. And it is basically the belief that because Latin America is so racially mixed, at least it is majority mixed, that racism doesn't exist, okay? And honestly, this is a belief that many Latinos hold. And I even admitted that at points, at certain times, I found myself kind of leaning towards this belief. But then I had to keep in mind, okay, just because we're all mixed, and yes, many of us do get along with other Latinos regardless of race or color, but that's not every Latino, okay? And the reality is that while I think to an extent it has helped to decrease, I guess, some of that racism, okay, it still hasn't eradicated it. It's still there. And at the end of the day, you do have certain Latinos, specifically more European descent, white Latinos, that are still very racist towards indigenous and Black Latinos. And that just is what it is, okay? So the article went on to say, even if everyone is mixed, human beings will never look exactly the same, okay? This Professor Wade, he said that even the most minuscule differences are enough to generate racial categorizations. And that is absolutely correct. So because so many Latinos are mixed, and I mean, it's not even I don't know, you can even use the US as an example. Here, all mixed people, regardless, they were thrown into the Black category. However, within this big Black category, distinctions were made based on your skin color, okay? Where, people started to highlight light-skinned Black people from dark-skinned Black people. And then once you bring in things like texturism, featureism, okay? I know some people don't like all the isms, but hey, there's truth behind these isms, okay? Which is people discriminating you based on your hair texture, based on your features. And then this is something that, of course, happens in Latin America as well. This was ways to further maintain these racial categorizations, because at the end of the day, all of the Americas were basically founded and built on these principles and putting people into categories and maintaining this social hierarchy, okay? So the more mixed people get, the more you have to now start looking at more specific features in order to try and maintain this, hierarchy, okay? So that's when people start looking at your hair texture, what shade of tan or brown you are, how close to European or whatever are your facial features and things like that. Okay, and then kind of going on with what I just said, the article said, paying attention to more specific features, texture of your hair, shape of your nose, the shade of brown, okay? And they also pointed out, we are only 150 to 200 years post-slavery and colonization, which when you really think about it, considering that colonization lasted about 500 years in most areas, The fact that we've only been between, 100 to 20 years post-slavery, that's not very long. So it's not surprising that a lot of these systems of racial classification and hierarchy, they still exist to this day. Now, do I believe that we've come a long way as far as trying to dismantle some of that? Of course, but again, at the end of the day, it hasn't gone away. In Latin America, again, using that region of the world as an example, although many of us are very, very generationally mixed people, racism has not gone away. There are still Latinos that view other Latinos as being beneath them, okay, because they're, I don't know, more indigenous or more African. And then you still have the self-hate stuff that goes on. So I say all that to say that no, race mixing does not get rid of racism, okay? It doesn't. May it help? Yes. And there are some that allude to the fact that, I don't know, a few decades from now, the majority of the world is going to be mixed race. The majority of the United States is going to be mixed race. And so some people view that as, like, I guess, or hoping, or I don't know, as some type of proof that eventually racism is just going to crumble. Whereas others view that as, well, if anything, that's going to make white people more desperate and more, they're going to get a little more hostile when it comes to trying to preserve their status at the top of society and who they deem as white or not white. Something along those lines. So I read something like that. So yeah, guys, okay, this video is going on almost 18 minutes. So that was it for this video. Let me know your thoughts down below, you guys, and let's try to keep the comments like not too crazy, okay? Let's not get too hateful. Because these are racially charged type of videos. My comment section be getting a little crazy, so let's try not do that today, okay? So yeah, just leave your thoughts down below, whether you're Black or you're Latino, whether you believe Black and brown unity exists, or whether you believe that race mixing gets rid of racism. Stand down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll check you guys next time.